Research, the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies, Dr. Nagla Rizk, Professor of Economics and Founding Director, Access to Knowledge for Development Center, AUC School of Business, Dr. Ayman Ismail, Associate Professor, and Abdul Latif Jamil, Endowed Chair of Entrepreneurship, AUC School of Business, and Director of AUC Venture Lab. We have chosen to frame our discussion today around the three levels of the individual, the organization, and the system or the nation. For individuals, we will be addressing the issues of skilling, reskilling, and upskilling. For organizations, forecasting future needs and retaining the relevant talent. For countries, highlighting the policy issues related to impact on employment and social justice and economic development. To start us off, I would like to invite you to watch with us a short video reminding us of how we got here. Safa, can we have the video, please?
How we work, where we work, even what we do when we're at work has shifted constantly due to technological, cultural, and economic changes through the years. Today, amidst a global crisis, yet another work revolution is brewing. But in order to understand where we are going, we should start with where we began.
If you look back in history, work and jobs are social artifacts. The Industrial Revolution, that's when things started changing. As factories became bigger, you needed people who would come and manage the bureaucracy around the factory. So in some ways, the concept of people moving to office work was an extension of the factory. Just like you had foremen in the factory, you had supervisors who had to get things done, and employees were instruments for executing things. Coming out of the war, many people were chasing the American dream. That was a remarkable era of growth.
Workers that grew up in the Great Depression, what they wanted was a sense of economic stability. So there was this unspoken social contract. If you came and you were loyal to the company will take care of you.
Post-World War II was a transformative time within the workplace, as employers sought ways to drive creativity and innovation by creating a more welcoming work environment.
We saw Herman Miller create what is known as the Action Office. It was about creating an individual workspace for people that really was supportive of them and enabled their own best individual creative work. You have your own individual little space, you go in there and you do your work.
His idea was flexible spaces. It was designed to capture how do workers work and what are the partitionings that are needed. But what ended up happening was it became a one-size-fits-all cubicle, which was not the original intention.
Computers of the future are being developed. As computers relieve people of many tedious routine jobs.
As the evolution of the PC happened more toward the 80s, we were now in the age of what can you invent? What can you create?
That's also the time when you started using the word talent more for describing your people.
As the markets continued to grow, employees began to sense a shift in company loyalty. People began to put their own needs and interests first, and thus the war for talent began.
The technology companies of the early 2000s were in a huge war for talent, and they were all about driving this new, different type of experience. It was really about how do we create an environment that is engaging and will bring people here, and it wouldn't be bad if it kept them here a few extra hours a day. Mobile technology has had an amazing impact on the way work is done. The entire knowledge of the world is available in your pocket on a phone.
We no longer had to only be in the office. That technology enabled the rise of the remote worker.
And that rise exploded unexpectedly to global scale in the spring of 2020.
It's fascinating to see this giant work from home experiment happen and happen rapidly, where essentially companies shut down and put everyone online in a matter of days.
Studies have shown productivity has gone up because they're working harder from home.
We're going to now need to continue to think about, can we still say that work is enabling a life well lived? What does that do to the quality of life?
We're going to stay in this twilight zone for a while. But I would say this is the time when you need to rethink the equation. Breakdowns are the best times to think through breakthroughs.
Thank you, Safa. So building on the last comment in the video, breakdowns are the best times for breakthroughs. And I hope this is what we achieve in our webinar today, a breakthrough for how to move forward and navigate the challenges of the future of work. I would like to start now the questions to our panelists. And Srinivas, I will start with you. And if you could talk to us a little bit about what are the needs of future jobs, and can we anticipate the skills required for those future jobs? You can unmute yourself, please.
Thank you very much, Gada, for giving me this opportunity and giving the ILO the opportunity to be on this panel today. So, warm greetings from Geneva. Thank you very much. Working on the issue of future of jobs and future of skills, I want to congratulate you and your team for choosing this theme, which is very, very contemporary and relevant. As we watch the movie, from the days of industrial revolution to the current situation of working from home and the profound impact of digitalization that is showing up today in the world of work. From ILO, I would like to place for your consideration a few pointers where we are going and what is the future that is looking like. The world of work is going through profound transformation, and this is mainly due to the global mega drivers that are affecting the world, be it a technological change or the globalization and the way the production and the services are organized throughout the world, the impact of climate change and environmental sustainability, increased labor mobility, and also the demographic changes. Some of these mega drivers have profound impact on the way the work is organized and the way the work is delivered. The question is, what will the jobs of the future, and therefore what skills are required for delivering this work? Let us look into some of the key data points. The World Economic Forum report, World Economic Forum 2020, says that as many as 85 million jobs may be displaced by the shift in the division of labor between humans and machines. So there will be a significant change in composition of the tasks in many jobs. Similarly, the report also says as many as 97 million new roles may emerge, which will require major reskilling and upskilling. So that is the type of future that one is predicting. There were series of reports and also examination by the ILO through the Global Commission on World of Work, on the future of work. So the Global Commission has dealt with this issue after series of consultations throughout the world, in all parts of the world, and it came up with a suggestion that there is a strong need to invest in creation of jobs, particularly looking at the new economies. The World Commission pointed out 3 new economies: care economy, digital economy, and green economy. The need to invest in job creation in these 3 economies, in addition to strengthening the job creation in rural economy, because rural economy is playing a very important role in many parts of the world. So let us look at some of the data points in the care economy. One ILO report suggests that if we double the investment in the care economy, it could lead to a creation of nearly 475 million jobs by 2030, meaning 260 million new jobs could be added if we double the investment in care economy. Similarly, another ILO report suggests that the green economy could add as many as 18 million new jobs by investing in the green. And you all know that the digital economy is having profound impact, and it has several implications in terms of the jobs. So the key question therefore is, what type of skills required for these new economy jobs, but also the traditional economy, including rural economy? Can we anticipate the future skills needs? I think that is the million-dollar question, really.
Exactly.
Do we already know, what type of skills required for the future? And in that case, that is the kind of currency that one can already possess. I think,
Thank you, Srinivas. I'll move on to Pedro and come back to you in the second round of questions to continue. Pedro, we saw in the video that technological progress disrupting labor relations has been constant for centuries. What do you think is different this time? And are these trends socially sustainable?
Okay, so thanks, Gada, for the nice invitation. It's really a big pleasure to be with you and my colleagues that I grabbed the chance to compliment on being here together today. I hope we managed to have a fruitful discussion and that other people think the same. So picking up on your words, that's true. I mean, it's not like, this is something inherently or intrinsically new, technology disrupting labor relations. I mean, if you go back to the end of the 18th century, when James Hargreaves invented the spinning jenny, all of a sudden you could have, one worker do the work of 8 people at the same time. And back then there were a lot of people getting angry, right? I mean, they formed gangs called the machine breakers that would go to factories and sabotage these machines that were, destroying their jobs and so forth. So what is it essentially new this time? Well, I would like to point your attention to 2 things. So one thing that is new is that throughout time, these innovations tend to take some time. For example, the spinning wheel to make cloth took about 27 years from invention to become mainstream, okay? So the first thing that we see these days is the speed of implementation of new technologies, the speed at which these labor relations are disrupted. And of course, together with this speed, that is much faster, what happens is that all of a sudden you have old generations that become, so to speak, obsolete with severe problems of unemployment that can't really reinvent themselves. We're talking about people in their 50s that have the 9th grade, they have no digital skills, and they were factory workers and so forth. So those people are in trouble, especially in the West, right? Especially in the West, because people in other parts of the globe, they still benefit from some offshoring from the main economic blocks. So that's the first thing, is the speed at which this happens that makes it really hard from a sustainable point of view, to have a balanced society and people having time to adjust to these new impacts. The second thing is that historically, as technology improving our living standards, which is a great thing, right? I mean, if you any person watching this talk or in this panel has a much better life quality than any person alive in the 18th or 19th century. Imagine what was going to the dentist without anesthetics, okay? That enough should calm us on that side and being friendly towards technology. But what changed is that historically, increases in technology, in the capacity that we have of making production processes and technology that makes us produce more with the same amount of resources, it always kind of spilled over to wages of workers. Okay, so up to the 70s, technology would increase, our capacity to produce would increase, and real wages would also increase, which means that everybody was benefiting with the process. Now, you look at the West mostly, and what you see after the 70s is that there's a disconnect between the increases in productivity and labor compensation. And what you see is that, technology keeps evolving. We are being able to produce more and more and more with the same resources, but very few of that extra wealth that is being created is flowing to the average Joe. Okay, so that also creates a lot of problems and makes this whole issue extremely, society extremely vulnerable to populisms, to anti-establishment movements and sentiment. And is definitely, I think, if not the biggest, one of the biggest challenges that we have facing forward is how to develop policies that include everyone, that have in place the right incentives for people to be productive, to be efficient, to be competitive, but at the same time, we don't let people behind. Not just purely on a normative point, because I'm a good person, I want everyone to be happy. It's not just about that. I mean, if you want to have a positive standpoint on this, in order for, you know, the democratic regimes and everything to keep going as it is, you can't have wealth benefiting just 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or even 40% of the people. As long as you have 51% of the people who are angry, you are vulnerable to regime change, populism, and all these things.
And I'm sure everyone listening has no idea or has no references to what you're talking about. In the past 10 years, we've all seen this playing out all over the world. So thank you for your insight. Dr. Abla, I'd like to turn to you now and to ask you what, in your view, are the preconditions for a successful handling of future of work issues? And especially, how do you assess Egypt's readiness for this?
Thank you, Dr. Rada, and it's great to be here. It's always great to be with AUC, always great to be home and to see some familiar faces and experts in the field. And thank you for the question on the how. How do we do this? We are watching future of work happening, we are watching changes, but what are we doing about them? In order to do anything at all about them, there are certain preconditions, in my opinion, that need to be respected and addressed. I see 4 conditions. First one is the proper understanding of the problem itself. Yes, there are jobs that are being lost in a huge number, but at the same time, there are other jobs that are being created with different levels of skills. If we don't see that, then we cannot have the transition from one stage to the other. The future of work situation is affecting different ages differently, gender differently, sectors differently. If we don't see that, we cannot address the problem in the right way, we cannot adopt the right policies. So this is the first point. The second point is the institutional framework, okay, that is dealing with the transition to a future of work situation. You cannot have, touching upon Egypt a little bit, we cannot have the existing structure of the Ministry of Labor Force and Ministry of Education in order to talk about something that's completely different. Okay, they cannot be operating in the same way, operating with the same people, with the same structure, and yet address the challenges of the future. Third factor is the existence of the proper infrastructure. Infrastructure that is suitable and needed for the fourth revolution is completely different than the previous ones. It's based on strong communication and IT system. I mean, we've seen people working online all the time with COVID-19. If you don't have a decent infrastructure, you have an issue. You cannot have education or work or anything done right. Fourth, actually, there are 5 factors. I'm adding one. The fourth one is the availability of data, intelligence on workers. If you don't know your workers, if you don't know the skills of the people, how can you possibly upgrade them? If you don't have this in an updated way, in all sectors, in details, you cannot do anything. And then the last item is that all efforts related to the economic reform in this country and in any other country, the restructuring, going in that direction and doing it right is definitely going to help with the future of work. On Egypt, we are actually far behind in all 4. Okay, we have efforts in each and every one of them, but we need a lot more to go. Different levels here and there, but we definitely need a lot more work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abla. And Nagla, if I can go to you now and ask you, why is the future of work more pressing in Egypt today? You're on mute, Nagla.
Thank you, Ghada, and thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to use my 4 minutes very efficiently, and I'll just start by saying, by quoting the World Economic Forum in calling what happened with COVID a double disruption. We talk about the future of work. The future of work is really the current reality. This is what I no longer see it as a future of work, is the immediate future of work. And why is it pressing for Egypt? I think because of the way things are in Egypt, the economic realities. And I have to give credit to Dr. Abla's, the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies, because I've really used a lot of their material in looking at this. to look at the reality of Egypt. Egypt continues its reliance on external sources of finance: oil, Suez Canal, tourism, remittances of workers in the Gulf. Since we were students, this has been the case, all right? The last three alone, the remittances, tourism, and Suez Canal, account for almost 15% of GDP. Egypt has, I'm going to list a few facts. Egypt has a huge informal sector, which needs to be embraced, by the way. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but the fact that the informal sector contributes to a majority of, provides work for people, this informal sector really suffered during the COVID crisis. It has shouldered Egypt during the financial crisis of 2008, during the political disruptions in the last decade. Come COVID-19, the informal sector is severely struck and takes with it, part of what is happening with the formal sector. It is also part of the majority of the economy is small and medium enterprises, and these were hardly hit by having to recreate themselves given the digital needs for the current reality. The limited economic diversification meant that unemployment in Egypt is structural. There's a mismatch between supply and demand, but with COVID-19, it becomes also cyclical. Now, the fact now is that we have a unique demographic situation. We have a demographic pyramid that we are all aware of. The majority of our population are youth, are less than 30 years of age. This can be an asset, but when you have figures of unemployment of the youth that actually tells you 31% of our youth are unemployed, when 21% of graduates with advanced degrees are unemployed, when 22% of our women are unemployed, we have a problem. So the future of work actually becomes the future of work for these people. In fact, it is the current reality of work for those, those who are already unemployed, those who are losing work, and the youth who are going to be wanting to work in the coming few years. Youth unemployment is especially worrying. Egypt is host to one of the most growing youth populations in the world, as indicated by the ILO in 2020. So in that case, you have, the reality is we have poverty. Currently, the poverty rate is twice what it was in 2000. 1 in 3 people live on less than $1.45 a day, and more than 6 million people live on less than $1 a day. Pedro talked about inequality, spot on. Inequality in Egypt is complex, multi-layered, multidimensional, extends beyond income inequality to encompass inequality of opportunity, discrepancies in access to education, employment, health, sanitation, inequality by gender, geography, analog divides coupled with digital inequities and feed into intertwined developmental inequalities that painfully cut across lives. Multidimensional inequality is especially a reality for women. Scriven talked about the care economy. The care economy is shouldered by women in this society and elsewhere in the world. So the labor market we need to address. Given all of this, given the need for speed and agility, we have a labor market that is rigid, that is, there's a mismatch between supply and demand. There is an inertia coming from the rigid skill structure of our labor. Until now, there is the ban on travel, but we used to have a constant human capital flight of skills that are leaving leaving the country. So shaping a skill pyramid, which feeds actually into income inequality. So unless corrective measures are taken, what is termed as the skill-biased technological change, which also Pedro spoke about, coming with technological revolutions, will likely lead to further marginalization and alienation of population groups lacking equitable access to modern and advanced education, to technology. Abla mentioned data, so I will not mention this. I can mention this later.
This is your passion.
Yes, and exactly. And we need also disaggregated data for proper policy, to inform proper policy making, not just for safety nets, but also for inclusive policy making. There's plenty of challenges, including connectivity, but I want to say there are opportunities I will talk about in my...
We'll talk in the next round about the opportunities.
So
Thank you, Nagla.
Bleak picture, sorry, but there are opportunities.
I know, I hear you, So we've talked about, thank you, Nagla. We've talked about the macro level. So Ayman, I'll turn to you to take us to the micro level. So when we talk about future of work at the macro level, we're looking at it from the bird's eye view. The real change happens at the sectoral level. Can you give us some examples of what you're seeing or projecting as some of the key sectors in Egypt that are affected, and how do you see them being affected?
Thank you so much, Ghada, and it's a pleasure to be with this fantastic panel. Last year, Nagla and I worked with the ILO to actually look at what's happening in Egypt, especially at the sectoral level. And I think this can help bring some of those abstract concepts to what's happening actually on reality. And I work a lot with startups, so I would love to see what entrepreneurs are doing. They're doing a lot of disruptions in some sectors, but it has impact and we need to think about that. So let's take some 3 examples of sectors. Healthcare sectors, and I think Srinivas was talking about the care economy. In Egypt, we have the spending on healthcare around 1.2, less than 2% of the GDP. If you look at the US or developed countries, you'll find that it's between 15 to 20% of the GDP. Huge opportunity for change, but that comes with growth. But we look at how the service itself is delivered. There's a lot of change and a lot of need in that space. We're seeing a lot of platforms that are coming where people can start ordering service, having access to service, having access to doctors. This is a space that is going to be disrupted in a big way, but we also believe that there's a huge opportunity in the care economy, as Srinivas was saying. You look at the manufacturing sector. A lot of the manufacturing is happening in a centralized way, a large factory, and I think the video was fantastic in showing how this is affecting it. But with 3D printing, we're seeing a lot of distributed manufacturing that's happening. It's not happening immediately. It's going to take some time to transition, but it's going to have a big impact on the imports and exports. Where are things being where things are being built is going to be closer to the market. A very small example from a startup, it might not what people think about manufacturing. Mugassam, they do the 3D printing for implants, dental implants. Rather than having this go to a workshop and come back, now it can take place in the dentist office. It's disrupting an existing job. It probably will go away. It's creating new jobs that are dependent on technology. So that's an example. A third sector that's heavily affected, the retail and wholesale, the trade in general. Rather than buying something from a store, now a lot of us are buying things from e-commerce. We're seeing malls that are declining in many parts of the world, and I think the trend is going to pick up in Egypt. Jobs in retail, in stores, are going to be lost. But new jobs in last mile delivery, warehousing, 3PL are going to be created, e-commerce related jobs. So we're seeing that kind of transition. If we take the sectors one by one, whether the fintech or the edtech or the IT, offshoring or outsourcing, we'll see those disruptions happen. In some industries, especially like IT offshoring, that is going to happen on a big scale. So rather than people answering the phone as customer service or call centers, some of those jobs will be automated with robocalls and with other IT or AI related situations. So some of the jobs in Egypt that were answering calls in Europe might actually go away. So these changes are going to be happening in global markets. You might not see a change in Egypt that might be happening in Germany or the UK, but actually trickling down in Egypt. So if we look at all of these things, what have we learned? Specific points. One is platforms are becoming a huge part of the new job market, platforms and the gig economy. People are working on Uber-style platforms for so many different types of jobs, especially in the services and manufacturing and the services sector. Second thing, there's a big change in the relationships between the employer and employee. The normal long-term relationships now are dissolving and being substituted by gig economy type, shorter-term contracting types of relationships. How are those going to be managed, governed, regulated to take care of labor labor rights, but also government policies? Third thing is business readiness. Some companies are ready, they're leading the charge. Some are adapting, but many are not ready. So how does the business sector actually be ready for those types of changes? Now we've seen with COVID, you have to jump into a very different environment. Do you need your office? How big of an office do you need? What's the management structure? How do I control my team? How do I ensure productivity? How do we build team culture, actually?
Exactly.
Huge changes.
Exactly.
And then
team culture of a blended team.
Absolutely. Blended, geographically distributed team. I have people, I mean, one person in my team moved to Dubai. She's still part of the team and productivity is the same and she's there. And I don't even think about it for a second. 2 years ago, That was not on the plate. Last point is the educational sector, and we'll handle that in the next time.
That in the next round.
What are we going to do there? So those are all big questions, big areas, and I think they're worthy of deeper change. Thank you, Ghada.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ayman. And this was a good segue to my next question to Srinivas, education. What are some of the major trends and challenges in preparing the workforce for the future, especially with respect to education and training?
Thank you very much, Ghada. I think colleagues have already raised some number of very good propositions in terms of what we need to get ready with. Let me raise a couple of important dimensions as we are mainly talking to the world of education. One of the major challenges today in the world is how do we bring the world of education and world of work together? These are two different worlds. Unfortunately, in many parts of the world, these two operate in parallel tracks and do not have good mechanisms for a very close interaction and close cooperation. And why it is necessary? As we discussed in the first segment, as the world of work is going through profound changes, one job for life is not relevant for many occupations. We heard the other panelists. People have to undertake multiple transitions. So school to work transition is going to be continuing to be very important, but not enough. People have to make job to job transitions, job to family, family back to work, and then work to the retirement, and because of the changing demographics, extended retirement ages, so that people will have to be ready for multiple transitions. Some studies suggest that as many as 6 to 7 jobs are minimum changes that one will go through. If that is the situation, so for the world of education, I have a proposition and a question. The front loading of education for a qualification for a lifetime, is it continuing to be valid? I acquire a master's degree, whether that master's degree is continuing to be relevant for 30, 40 years of my working life or not is questionable. So do we need to really, therefore, look at the paradigm shift in the way education is organized, putting the lifelong learning as the organizing principle of education? If people will have to have opportunities for continuous learning, upskilling and reskilling, so the education itself has to look at lifelong learning as the organizing principle, not just young people to go through education, but people of all ages to go through the skilling and upskilling. And therefore, what are the different roles of the different actors in this? It's not just about only the education sector taking responsibility, but the economic and education actors and the key partners of the labor market, like the employers and enterprises, workers' organizations, and the relevant government agencies. So there is a very clear need for whole of the government approach, plus the tripartite approach. The key partners of the labor market have to undertake these exercises through a process of social dialogue. But let me raise also another important point from the people point of view. So, okay, what do we need to learn if it is a continuing education and lifelong learning? The need for investing in core skills, the foundational skills, and some shifts like learning to learn. For example, my education is over, I throw away the books, and for the rest of the life, no, that's not the valid thing now. Learning to learn and investing in the 4 C's, for example, the communication, collaboration, creativity, and critical thinking are becoming very important, and also the adaptability to change. Some of these transferable skills, which can be used in any sector, any occupation, as the work demands are changing. So need to invest in more of these core skills and foundational skills is becoming very important. And also providing access to the people otherwise cannot access. Like one panelist is saying, there is a huge informal economy in many of these countries. So do we really, how do we cater to the needs of those workers in informal economy and women workers and many other, people who do not have access to, let us say, digital equipment and, online learning.
Thank you.
So the access is very important. Thank you, Ghada.
Thank you, Srinivas. Thank you very much. So it's the lifelong learning and the access. Pedro, what is the scope for policymakers here? Do we need to have government intervention when we're talking about the future of work and how. Pedro, you're on mute.
Yeah, that's the most fashionable sentence of 2020.
Yes.
So yeah, so thanks, Gada, for the question. So indeed, there are some market failures into this process. So what I mean by this? So of course, I mean, more upskilling and reskilling is good for everyone. Is good for the firm, who has more productive workers. It has a stronger pool of workers to choose from. It's good for the worker whose work is worth more, and it's good for the government because it saves in, if the worker is integrated, is valuable, is in the job market, and is working, you know, all the social transfers and all that stuff, you know, it's not a problem. The issue is that there are, as I introduced the topic, some market failures. First, because many times it would be, you know, in the firm's best interest to provide this upskilling or reskilling to their own workers, but they can't really internalize that fully, right? So after they invest a lot of resources in upskilling, there's nothing preventing, in the majority of the cases, not all. In some cases, you can make some closed contracts, but in most cases, you know, nothing prevents the worker to work to the next company, you know, in next street or something. So because they don't internalize fully the investment in their workers, most often there's a sub investment of upskilling in those people. It's also a problem on behalf of the workers because, you know, because you have the speed of this being so fast, what happens is that you can get some education either through an apprenticeship or something more evolved, a tertiary education. But then, you know, you get married, you have kids, you have a lot of financial responsibilities, you gain rigidities in your ability to, you know, go back to school or try to learn a new apprenticeship and so forth. So there are liquidity constraints, time constraints, many constraints that prevent the worker to invest optimally in updating his own skills to stay relevant. So that's where, I guess, to some extent, the government can intervene in performing policies that can also help this process to be smoother. There's also another issue, which is many of the institutions that could provide this training, they tend to be, you know, public sector apprentices schools or universities that are heavily bureaucratic. They take a long time to adapt to new content, to new demands from the labor market. So all the process of coordinating this interaction between, you know, education institutions, be it universities or professional schools, depending on the level what we're talking about, workers and firms, because it's a market failure in many dimensions, it needs government intervention. So to conclude, I mean, if we think about what is I would say a guiding strategy that we are implementing at local municipalities in Portugal. We've done this for Cascais, which is where the university, the Nova School of Business and Economics is situated. And now we're also applying this to Oeiras municipality, which is right next to that one. So on behalf of the employers, of course, it's important to plan strategically their workforce and continuously monitoring the lack of skills that they might have in the workforce, not just now, but forecasting into the future. And this forecasting is very important because it's through interacting with the other stakeholders, namely, you know, the public sector through the apprenticeship schools and universities, that we can create the competences that always take some time in order that when this skill gap becomes binding, right, in terms of now we need to hire because we're adopting this new technology that we anticipated by 2 or 3 or 5 years, we will have people to work with those things.
Exactly.
Right? So that's what it's so important. And at the same time, find programs supported by the government to allow people to do their own upskilling, to go over this credit constraint. And we estimated for Portugal, such programs actually save the government money. Think about the 50-year-old that worked in a factory, you know, low-skilled, repetitive work kind of stuff. It will be like 10 years taking social transfers from the government, right? Not creating value, not paying taxes, but being a burden economically, of course. And also creating a lot of social problems because we know the prevalence of crime, of health, even health outcomes are much worse in this segment of the population. So for in Portugal, we estimated for these 2 municipalities, they get 100% return on investment. So it's not like it's a bad thing, right?
So there's a business case for it as well. There's a business case for the government,
sure,
the proper government intervention, let's say.
You don't need to be normative to create a rationale for this kind of interventions. They pay for themselves.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Pedro. Dr. Abla, do you see a link between something like universal basic income and the future of work? Do you think it's a relevant question?
Yes, actually, I think it's very relevant, and it sort of follows from what my colleague right now was talking about. First of all, universal basic income is a concept that goes back to the 1800s, and it always emerges in difficult times, okay? And it's a very simple, it's a government program that's supposed to give money to everybody unconditionally and regularly. I think Gerhard Center actually did a beautiful webinar on the issue last year. It's very relevant, okay? With the future of work, people are losing jobs not because they don't want to work, but because whatever it is that they represent, their characteristics do not seem to fit the new jobs, okay? So he's losing job because there are no jobs, that not only availability of jobs with the same skill, but his skill is not needed. So this is really a scary part. And you do need consumers in the economy as well. So it is very relevant to that, particularly that it was also coming at a time of where you have high income inequality in all societies, including ours and all of them. Now came COVID-19, accelerated madly the future, all right? Crying about and it's right there. And people, quality of life, potential for human development, they do need this. Now, there are many issues related to universal basic to be paid for, it's created this incentive to work. It has issues around it, but what is for sure is that it needs to be looked at as part of the, again, how and the specifics. We don't only look at the problem, but we try to do something about it. The minute that we can do to start this process, I'm talking about Egypt, is to revisit all of our social programs, all of our programs of support, because some of them actually have very serious negative biases that people don't talk about. And I'll give you very quickly 2 specific examples. One of them is there is a cash transfer that's given to people with handicaps, all right? If those people start working, this money is cut away from them. They don't take it anymore.
It's a disincentive.
So they don't report work.
It's a disincentive.
Okay? Of course. So speaking of informality, all right, you are expanding informality like crazy. This is one. Another one, we started the program during COVID-19 of paying £500 to the poor people, right? So it's sort of very similar to the concept. And yet, we don't have any information about these people. We don't have any information about their skills. We did not create a pool of labor force, actually. The business community is looking for workers in certain areas, right? And this is a pool of workers. This link is not there, all right? So we definitely need to revisit. If we don't revisit, then it's all talk about future of work, and it's all talk about poverty, and it's all water everywhere, and not a single drop to the tank.
Thank you, Dr. Abla. And
thanks, Nagla, on the comments.
For the shout out to ECS, yes. So Nagla, if we actually go to the specifics, what are the opportunities that are emerging, especially for the issue of inclusion and especially for women?
Thank you, Ghada. I will, divide. First, want to talk about global opportunities. Ayman mentioned the platform economy, digital platforms. I specify digital platforms, and I just note that in the forward to the UNCTAD World Investment Report 2020, the Secretary General of the UNCTAD specifically mentioned the opportunities for developing countries through digital platforms. The Oxford Internet Institute is running research on online labor, online work, and there is tremendous potential. Ayman mentioned the call centers. These jobs are going away, but there is potential for higher value added jobs, if you will, in technology support, software development, database management, bookkeeping, accounting, etc. There is an opportunity for developing countries to engage with this if there is a conscious effort to train our people, and we do have educated people who are out of work. So the challenge, or perhaps the opportunity, is how can we link those people that we have that are out of work to these global platforms, global digital platforms. Now, looking in, I mean, just domestically, I will touch upon e-commerce. Ayman mentioned e-commerce, new business models for existing industries, the creative industries, trying to find new ways of doing work that is engaged digitally. In the health sector, again, I just want to quote The Economist. Global revenues from the digital health sector, including telemedicine and online drugstores, is expected by McKinsey to increase from 350 billion in 2019 to 600 billion in 2024 after the COVID pandemic. What can we do here? Ayman mentioned excellent examples. I just want to emphasize what I call cross-skilling. Fertilization of skills between doctors, software engineers, and data scientists. We do not want to work in silos, so especially in the health sector, this would work very well. If we train our doctors, our nurses on some basic digital skills, data science skills, we can have fantastic investment opportunities in this area. And of course, this can take place between government, large public corporations, education institutions, and SME collaboration of partnerships to push the health sector through using, the training people on digital skills on health workers. Data-driven innovation. Yes, my passion is in data, and data is crucial. Disaggregated data, disaggregated by gender. There is data invisibility. Some people are just completely outside, as Abla has alluded to, completely outside the radar of national statistics. How can we have inclusive policies if these people are not seen? So certainly improving the statistical framework, but also innovation in innovative activities that actually involve novel ways of collecting data. This is data-driven innovation, data-driven entrepreneurship. So in that sense, it is very important to have women as the subject of data, if you will, but also including women as makers of algorithms. Algorithms are biased and can aggravate data biases, but they have biases of their own. So how can we, there is also a great opportunity for training women in technology skills, women in tech-specific entrepreneurial initiatives by women. There's very interesting digital informal sector. Ayman and I have spoken about this. Women who are entrepreneurs on Instagram, on Facebook, on WhatsApp. Let's embrace that sector. Women are using technology to start their own businesses. How can we embrace that sector rather than look at it as an informal sector that needs to be formalized, which is precisely what should not happen. Financial inclusion of women, of course, access to finance, simple access to internet. The data on access to internet for women and to technology in general is always less than men. So there has to be conscious efforts in that direction. Encouraging and incentivizing diversity in the workplace for businesses, legislation that allow women flexible work and enable women to be able to take, to be part of the labor force. The numbers are dismal of women labor force participation. And a word on the care economy. Women bear the brunt of the care economy, may that be formal or informal or at home. According to the recent Oxfam report, the monetary value of women's unpaid care work globally for women aged 15 and over is at least 10.8 trillion annually, 3 times the size of the world's tech industry. And across the world, unpaid and underpaid care work is disproportionately done by poor women and girls. Egypt is no exception, especially after COVID. And we just look around us, we know exactly what I'm talking about. So, in the end, it is very important. Oxfam recommends that governments around the world must act now to build a human economy that is feminist and that values what truly matters to society rather than fueling the endless pursuit of profit and wealth. So in a nutshell, the use of technology, looking at the future of work, we need to use technology wisely to enable labor and new jobs rather than replace jobs, and with a conscious eye of encouraging female work and entrepreneurship and the flexibility to make use of the technology for flexibility for women's work in the private sector, in the informal sector, in the digital informal sector, and otherwise. I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nagla. So Ayman, moving to our context, we work in a university. a big part of the future of work takes place in higher education. How do universities change to prepare students for the future? Ayman? I think there is a connectivity issue. Ayman, can you hear us? I think his screen is frozen. Ayman? Yes. Okay. So let me, until Ayman comes back, we'll look at some of the questions. Ayman, are you back? Okay. So we have a question on the Q&A about the future of the digital economy. And this brings me to a larger question for all the panelists, actually, and I'll go around for each of you to comment. Is the future of work only digital? And how do we deal or try to understand the future of work in its multiple facets, with the understanding that the solutions are not one size fits all? So we're looking at what is going to happen in the Western world, what is happening in emerging economies, and within an economy like Egypt, what is going to be happening in different sectors. So how do we try to understand the future of work, and how much of it is the digital part? Is that what it's all about? So Srinivas, can I start with you to answer this question?
Thank you, Gada. Very good question. Is the future of work is all digital? Probably no. But interestingly, every economy, every sector, every occupation will have an impact of the digital changes, digital technologies. What percentage and at what proportion, it depends on the sector. So some can be very profound in terms of even complete destruction of the job by itself, but many jobs will undergo changes. So degrees of proportion. So we need to really equip people so that, from two angles. One is that to embrace these economic opportunities that new technologies offer in all walks of life. For example, agriculture and rural economy will continue to play a very important role in job creation. Hundreds of millions of jobs will be created in those. But we are already seeing technology can play an important role in improving productivity. But there is another, shadow dimension, which is these technologies, digital technologies, can increase the digital divide if we don't initiate concrete and specific proactive measures to promote access, including to all the people that do not have access to the equipment and the tools and the necessary infrastructure. And also, it can increase the inequalities because some people are already advantaged by having this awareness and access. So they are more likely to grab those opportunities rather than people who have no clue right now. Even they are looking at a computer on a blackboard. So so it will further increase the inequality. So we need to really pay attention to providing access to new technologies for all people and bridge the digital divide, because the COVID-19 pandemic has shown the real divide. Hundreds of millions of people in the world cannot simply do telework, cannot have access to this equipment. So we can no longer turn a blind eye to this digital divide. Time is right now to bridge the gap. Thank you.
Thank you. And Pedro, how do you see those geographic or class or gender or age discrepancies when we're talking about the future of work, and how do you see the extent of the digital part of it?
Again, yeah, so definitely, as I think Nagla was saying, this affects people in many different ways. And Nagla talked about gender, age, and yeah, so all those dimensions are relevant. And in the case of age, it's pretty much obvious that even though new jobs are being created, they won't be for the same people whose jobs were destroyed, right? So that alone creates inequality, and it's a big issue. Even in the pandemic, for example, you think about the pandemic and how the capability of working from home affects the labor relations, and you see that there's a clear divide across the income scale, where people who are make higher wages and so forth, they are the ones who are more able to perform remote work. Okay, so people who do more manual tasks that require social presence, those are the ones who are suffering the most. At the same time, the pandemic itself is generating inequalities because it tends to have worse effects on people who have comorbidities like diabetes, high blood pressure, and so forth. And these are diseases whose prevalence is bigger on the low income scale of the distribution. I think in many senses, the pandemic together with the digital will bring a lot of accelerated change. People are resistant to change naturally. They have inertia. And this was a perfect storm in terms of many people were at home and all of a sudden they were forced to pay their bills with the internet. They were forced to go online to some store and buy stuff. So you can't walk that back. I mean, you can get rid of the virus, but there's things that will never be the same again. Business travel, for example, is a sector that I think, is going to have a very lasting impact. A lot of people just discovered that meeting in Basel, Switzerland could have been a Zoom meeting. I mean, we're discovering it ourselves. I hope it doesn't have the same impact on academic conferences. Otherwise, I would love
tourism
to be in Cairo
for both Egypt and Portugal. Huh?
I would love to have visited Cairo and look at the pyramids instead of being in the basement of my place with my sweatpants and a nice shirt. So, yeah, I mean, there are things that came to stay that with the digital, together with the pandemic, it kind of, reinvented and accelerated a lot of change. I see going forward that some sectors will not recover. I think business travel is one of them. I think that, real estate, commercial real estate is also a sector that's going to be hurting a lot because, people are used to the commodity of buying online and having the stuff sent home. Competition will increase a lot. It's much easier to compare prices between online stores than physical stores. So there's a whole new world that comes from the interaction of the pandemic, which we haven't talked much, and the digital. Okay, first is the break of inertia. People adopted digitally massively. Technology responded. I don't think that we had I lost count to all the different platforms that I've used in conference calls, from Zoom to Blue Jeans to Teams to, all of these new solutions. I mean, there's one thing that I'm just going to mention before I finish, not to bother you, which is amazing. So before this pandemic, I made some financial literacy videos. So I have a little studio here at home with lights and a microphone, studio microphone, a green screen, and all that stuff. And I use this software that replaces the green screen with some nice images, videos, and so forth. And in just the space of 10 months, it's insane, the technology, how much it changed in something as simple as changing the green screen with a nice image. All this machine learning, artificial intelligence, kind of algorithms that make the process of putting artificial images with the quality and the speed that we have today. So definitely digital, of course, has a big impact on defining the future of all these things. But I think a key feature is that the pandemic put that on steroids. And that's and with great threats and opportunities, threats in terms of, making inequalities even starker, and of course opportunities because, it's much more efficient to have a business meeting over Skype than actually conferences and other stuff.
Exactly. Thank you, Pedro. Dr. Abla, I'm going to ask you one of the questions that came from the participants, and I think it fits into what kind of data we can have and provide. So we have a question: is there any potential to create a career chart to let different professions map their current fields to the future, so they will be able to identify the required skills? Would we be able to do something like that?
Yes, it is doable. As a matter of fact, at ECS, we're going to do something like that soon. But I want, if I may, on the previous question, I think it's actually all digital. It's either directly digital or indirectly, because even with the new technology, It's being transferred to the workers and the people that are working digitally. And so all services are actually being digitized. And this means that people need to be trained, not to be programmers necessarily, but to know how to simply use the applications. It's as simple as that. Yes, we can. Big data analysis is the key word now. There are lots of information on the internet, for example, offering jobs, okay, and certain skills, okay. Analysis of this type of data would actually reveal the nature of the demand in the labor market. So it's very, very possible. Okay, it's very possible to do. The name of the game, again and again, and I'm all for with Nagla in this, is on the data. And it's an issue where we are extremely poor, and we know it's there, and yet we're not doing anything at all about it. Yeah. So the answer to the direct question to your answer is yes.
Yes, thank you. And Nagla, I'll try to combine two of the questions as I turn to you. Will transferable skills be more significant in the era of digitization than specialty with a narrow focus on a particular field?
Thank you, Ghada. I will answer this, and I'd like to take very briefly also to touch on the future of the digital economy, because I teach a course on the digital economy.
I know.
My students are there. Okay, just a quick answer to your question is that, in my opinion, in this day and time, this is not the time for silos, for sure. The more, the wider area of interest and specialization and being trained in more than one specific field is very useful. Like the example I mentioned about doctors and technology. I think there's a huge potential in this area. Health workers and technology, I can just see it. So this is, I hope this answers the question. But I want to also go back to the question of digital. I was writing notes and I said, maybe it doesn't have to be digital, but simple technologies can do, by the way, in our part of the world. We can still resort to radios and, and simple, especially in rural, to be realistic, in rural areas, we can still do so much by simple technologies. But when it is digital, the digital part is necessary but not sufficient, and I think that's very important, because once we install the digital technology, then what? It will not bring its return on the buck, as they say, unless there is a huge investment in skill of people who use this technology. I give the example to my students. I said, what if we get a huge mega computer in this room that looks like a white elephant and no one can operate it? What's the point of this investment? There's just no point. So by the time people learn to use the technology is very important. Maybe this also gives our demographics an advantage, because having this large percentage of young people, maybe there's room to, this gives us a potential for our young people to learn how to use the technology. A word on data. Data is crucial for inclusion. So while digital the more digital, of course, is the more likely it will be present in the future. But data is data, and I echo Abla's word. Big data. Data is very important. Data layering data on jobs with data on education, on data on the market can give you, and data visualizations can give you a lot of insights, and data for inclusion. Very quickly, I was looking at a link between what's happening with vaccine fights all over the world between countries, vaccine nationalism, to teach my students in the digital economy. And the link is data. Data about COVID cases and about the vaccine. It's crucial for policies that, vaccine campaigns and vaccine data. So vaccine plans, they require data. So while digital technology is important, it may not be always the key for the solution, always in different parts in the future, but data is crucial. The digital economy is definitely coming in varying degrees for sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Ayman, you're back with us, so thank you. So I have a few questions for you. We'd like you to address the question that we had for you before, which is about how universities change to prepare students for the future. And I'll give you a bit more time to comment on the conversation about digital and the questions, please.
Thank you so much, Ghada. Now, universities are in a very interesting space because a big part of the change is the preparation for the change is going to happen through universities. The new generations, educating the new generation, and also reskilling the existing generations. There are two dichotomous perspectives. One group of people are saying that we need to actually be deeper in tech skills, and it's more about the depth. Everybody need to be digitally savvy, digitally literate, and pretty much everybody needs to learn coding. It's the new language, it's the new math and reading and writing for the new generation. There's a completely different perspective that's saying, well, it's more about the skills that machines cannot replicate, the creative skills, the cognitive skills, the leadership skills, the soft skills. And I'm seeing both perspectives. And honestly, I think actually for universities, as we evolve, we need to think about both sides. We cannot, schools and universities, not just universities, we cannot graduate students that are not very digitally savvy. That is just the language of the future, and there's no escape out of it. But at the same time, if you want to be distinctive, it's not about doing tasks that are mechanically easily replicated. So the cognitive part, the teamwork, the leadership skills, the creative aspects are also big there. And that puts a huge challenge for us as educators on how do you manage both at the same time. The nature of the educational process will have to change. Three things. One, there's a lot more personalization that needs to happen, especially with digital. It allows you to customize, personalize a lot of the content, a lot of the pacing. People might be faster on some dimensions, slower on others. The manufacturing era, factory approach to education cannot continue. So that's one. The second thing is about interdisciplinarity. We might need to get the digital skills in place, but people have to be able to think in different disciplines and dimensions, because those are the kinds of problems that are coming in the future. The third thing is, and I think this leads to the digital part, digital and blended are here to stay as part of the education. So they're not going to go away. We don't need to have Zoom classes, but part of our education is going to happen in a digital way. How and why, that's an evolving part. What does that lead to? Universities and schools will have to think about new business models. Where is the money coming from? What are we offering? The old manufacturing paradigm, and I love the fact that we started with that. I usually start my classes with the Charlie Chaplin video from
I use that. I use it in my class as well.
It's fantastic. That world, we are still living in it a century later, and now is the time to transition. Now, what is digital in what we're doing? It's just like the new machine, the old manufacturing paradigm. It's just we're dealing with silicon and copper instead of what we're dealing with oil and machinery. So it's an integral part of what we're doing. But digital does not mean that we have to think about the people, the education, the business models, the softer side. Digital is just the infrastructure for that. So our business models will change, educational processes will change. So that's the more important part. And I think it's all about getting into the details and figuring out how do we reinvent the university or the factory or the company or the education or the government that goes with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayman. I'll start with another question, and I'd like you to start the comment, and then I'll go around to all the panelists. And this is a question from participants. I'm pulling from the questions of a number of people. There are several questions about policy making, policy direction, to mitigate the widening digital divide, either between nations in the global south or within a country, to make sure that digital literacy is not exclusive to people who are lucky enough to have access to technology. So addressing this both at the level of the inequalities within a country and at a global level. So I'll start with Ayman, and then I'll go around to all the panelists. Ayman.
Thank you, Reda. The first time I heard about the term digital divide was in the US, when the big cities were getting internet, and it was not economic for telecom companies to put it in rural areas. And people started saying that there is a digital divide happening. And I think now it's actually a more important and critical topic. We have to think a couple of things. One, I think that there is an opportunity. People think about the digital as our risk of lagging behind, but there is opportunity to leapfrog. You look at a country like Kenya. Kenya invented mobile wallets because people were behind. They managed to look for a digital solution that is accessible and bypass different generations of access to finance, credit cards, and so on, and reinvented a new solution. So we have to think about it from both dimensions. There is an opportunity to leapfrog. but people need to have access to a lot of the digital technologies. The access comes, it has to be cheap. It has to be everywhere accessible, like the connectivity. People have to learn how to use it. But there is, sometimes we get into that kind of assumption that because people are not as educated, they're not going to be able to use technology. It is not true. Illiterate people are using WhatsApp, they're using mobile wallets, they're sending money, they're working on platforms. We can leapfrog by getting people to become digitally literate, even more important than just
numeric and word
experiences. So we have to think about it in that way. The infrastructure is a big government part. Educating digital education as part of basic education is very important. Owning a tablet or a phone is huge for kids. It is very important. Give them a tablet and, you know what, open it so they can play games and read things that are not just part of the curriculum. Those kinds of things are transformative. And the more we do them, the more we have opportunities for inclusion to come in.
Thank you. Srinivas, what are your thoughts on the digital divide?
Thank you, God. I agree with Ayam. Basically, in terms of the digital divide, as you mentioned, while digitalization is already having a profound impact on all sectors of economy, it's very important to see how societies will systematically address the access issue, but also the world community addresses the much broader principle of access, equitable access to all parts of the world. In many parts of the world, still there is not even access. In some parts of the world, there is still not reliable electricity, reliable access to free and affordable internet. Bandwidth is a problem. When we saw in some of the countries that we are working in, for example, if the skills and TVET has to be shifted to online, simply there is no capacity at the institutional level. The teachers are not used to this kind of a modality. There are no equipment. There is no tools. So systematically promoting access. That's why investing in the infrastructure, digital infrastructure. Some countries are already talking about the right to data. How can we have access to all people to have basic equipment and right to data? Also, integrating the digital skills and even skills for green economy, the sustainability, as part of the foundational skills at the very early age, so that people have opportunities to acquire these skills from early on and then build on those skills, so that we're also able to bridge the divide.
Thank you. Pedro, your thoughts?
Well, yes, it's on. Well, so there's one thing that Ayman said that I think is pretty cool, and I think is spot on, which has to do with the fact that, you don't really need to have a university degree or even high school to be able to use or take advantage of some of these technologies. So we at Nova, we have some projects with mobile banking going to Africa, in Angola and Mozambique and Guinea. And, people are able with their phones to see prices of goods in other markets, receive information about real-time information from the government agencies on how to take care of their crops, stuff like that. So that's the first thing. I mean, realizing that, I think it's a big advantage. And also to realize that, as Ayman pointed out, the fact that in some countries, there's lack of, almost any introduction even to the digital world, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to go through all the process of rediscovering and inventing the whole procedure and culture of interaction with the stuff, because they can precisely leapfrog. I mean, I remember when I was a kid and I went as exchange student to Sweden, and I was looking at their ATM machines, and Sweden has this reputation of being so technologically savvy, right? And I was shocked. I mean, their ATMs were rubbish. They were really terrible compared with the Portuguese ones. And the reason why is that they were the first ones to have them, right?
Exactly.
So Portugal managed to do exactly what Ayman said. We kind of leapfrogged, and we have one of the most advanced banking systems in the world. It's a pity that it's only that, but anyway. So in that sense, I think there are a lot of opportunities on the lower end of the digital divide to make fantastic improvements and fantastic gains, to get a lot of bang for the buck, as Naga was saying. But of course, I mean, there's no global government. So it's not that easy to get global coordination into ending something that involves the coordination of 180 nations, right? But yeah, that's definitely something to worry about. And it's definitely something that has the potential to reverse some of the spectacular gains that the world has experienced in the last 50 to 70 years. I mean, we talk all this about inequality, this, inequality, that. Inequality is a big issue in the West, in the modern world, where you see that the middle class that, had made mainly the high school could, have a standard house and go on vacation and so forth. And today they drop to the bottom of the income distribution. If you talk about inequality globally, comparing what was China compared to the US or India compared to the UK 50 years ago, inequality actually gone down. Now, between countries, it has gone down mostly. Within countries, it tends to go up, especially in the West with offshoring and all that stuff. So, yeah, it's hard to coordinate global policies for this. I mean, but yeah, it has the potential to reverse some of those spectacular gains. So, coordinated action at the level of the World Bank and so forth. It's always
exactly of the multilateral institutions. Thank you. Dr. Abla, there is a question about how societies will finance lifelong learning. Whose responsibility is it? Is it the responsibility of the state or the employer or the worker or all three? And how do we start navigating this web of responsibilities?
Rada, you always ask me a new question.
Yes,
I'm very well
of course.
To answer the old question. Okay,
but you can do both here, Dr. Abla. I'm including the questions from the participants that are on the Q&A. That's why.
The digital divide is definitely a very serious issue. Okay, and let me talk about solutions really. Okay, not only about observing the thing happening. Globally, there are solutions. The G20 has just started. They had the conference actually for the T20 today, the first one. And one of the task force in the T20 is actually talking about the digital economy. And one of the key aspects is the inequality. So it is a concern. And it's a concern where the global community needs to push governments locally to do their job. When you look at Egypt, for instance, we do have serious inequality there. Okay, there is internet, but people who have access to high-speed internet, which is the internet that makes the difference, are very limited. Rural areas have it in a very poor way. It's a matter of governments being pushed to pay attention to this and set their priorities right. It can be done, of course, globally. It is even better if it's done and as we adjust our priorities inside and we have governance in our institutional setup in dealing with the communication system. Even regionally, there are solutions there. We did a study once on the trade in services between Arab countries, okay? And one of the key conclusions actually was the possibility of collaboration between the Arab countries in improving the infrastructure in all Arab countries. Some countries have the money, we have the expertise, entrepreneurs and the labor and the brains, all right? You put all this together and you can have a regionally strong area that would minimize the digital divide. If the digital divide should be one of our priorities to address because it helps in job creation. So it's you're hitting many birds with the same stone if you respect it. Now, speaking of long time, can you repeat the second question again?
So who bears the responsibility of lifelong learning? Is it the state or the employer or the individual? And how do you divide that responsibility moving forward?
You know, the multiple choice questions at AUC, all of the above. The answer is all of the above in different shares. The state is definitely responsible, the employer is responsible, and the employee is responsible. The question is, are you giving each one of these the tools in order to do their job? If you have a decent income, you are going to spend some of this income on learning. Even the poorest people spend their income on learning, on teaching their kids. It's a reality. Employers would be willing to, again, to give education to their employees if the government, give them incentives to do so. Okay, it's very simple. The state, it is their responsibility. Okay, it is their responsibility to upgrade the quality of the people, give them quality of life, and so it's the responsibility of all. How to divide? Okay, it will vary from one sector to the other. We have in manufacturing, for instance, many factories create schools actually inside the factory where they have the kids work, have education, work, and earn an income at the same time. You could ask people who go to the army during their year of the army to use that year in order to educate others. There is so much that can be done, and we actually have plans, but the plans are always bits and pieces. They are not part of a comprehensive program that is clear and strong and sustainable with the change of governance. Okay, exactly. We don't have complete solutions. This has always been our catch. So the answer is, it's everybody's responsibility.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Abla. Nagla, your comments on the digital divide.
Thank you very much. Can I just say something very quickly about what Abla said? I totally agree, but I also want to add that the partnerships of the type where we as university professors, we have gained crash courses in online teaching, and providing online content. There's a huge potential for, let's say, a CSR of telecoms, of companies that can use us as educators, with partnerships between the private sector, between educators, with government's support or blessings or state, whatever, to move forward. So the partnership issue is very important on this one. Very quickly on the digital divide, I have 3 very quick points. I think of it as a pyramid. So at the base of the pyramid is the infrastructure, and then there is access and connectivity, and then there is the divide can be in the use, in ending all the way to contribution to content, contribution to online content, may that be within a country or by different classifications or between different countries. The need for the infrastructure to expand only when the infrastructure expands well enough for costs to reduce, to go down. In the case of the dynamo, for example, the benefits of productivity came from the dynamo when electricity, the use of electricity was widespread. Why am I saying this? Because it's regulatory issues. If we have competition in this sector, more competition in this sector, the cost of connectivity goes down, there is room for further expansion. Finally, and this relates to women, there is a cultural component as well. If you have one computer at home, who gets to use it? It's the son and not the daughter. There is a cultural element in that. When resources are limited, when the devices are limited, usually women come at the end of the line, and that's important. So there is also a need for expanding awareness for how this can be useful for girls to learn, and women can actually benefit so much from using the technology. And this is a mindset that needs to really be spread across the country. Thanks.
Thank you, Nagla. So now I will go around another time to all the panelists, and I will give each one of you 1 minute for final thoughts on anything that we have discussed today, or messages that you would like to leave with the audience. So final thoughts, and I will start with Srinivas.
Thank you very much, Gada, for this very good discussion. My final thought is basically on the public policy, education, and the world of work. I clearly see the need for a paradigm shift in public policy to develop the next generation skills and lifelong learning ecosystem. There is a strong need to recognize that education and lifelong learning should be an integral part of comprehensive economic, fiscal, social, and labor market policies that are important for sustainable economic growth. The education should not be seen from a very narrow angle, but necessarily from the government development agenda. And establishing an effective lifelong learning ecosystem is a joint responsibility of the governments, employers, and workers. For example, you raise the important question of who pays for it. It has to be a joint responsibility. And along with the educational institutions, when these 3 players, governments, employers, and workers' organizations, establish such an ecosystem through a process of social dialogue, I think it is very likely that it will be a robust system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pedro, your thoughts? And the microphone?
Yeah. What can I say that hasn't been said? I mean, For sure. I mean, so most of us here, except Ayman, I guess, we're all university professors, if I'm not mistaken, connected and working with universities. I thought that, as I understood, Ayman is an entrepreneur, right?
No, but he's also a university professor.
Oh, okay. So it's more than that.
Professor of entrepreneurship at AUC as well.
Okay, so it's both. So that's great. I wish I could say the same. So yeah. So what is the role of universities in this process? And as Silvina said, also, what is the role that we can play in terms of this lifelong learning, on having this continuous journey with the population that we serve, in terms of, keep giving them the skills they need in order to be successful, to being, included and valuable workers through their lifetime. So that requires a little bit of a transformative attitude within the universities themselves. Traditionally, universities tend to be isolated kind of from the real world a little bit in their ivory towers, not so much cooperating with the private sector, not so much, engaging with society at large. In the last 10 years, 15 years, I think we've seen a major departure from that paradigm. Schools are getting more engaged, incentives are being put in place for universities to reach out, to form corporations, coalitions with the industry. Science outreach is being heavily incentivized by the funding agencies. So all this role of opening the university towards society can be a major transformative force, helping coping with the disruption that the digital world is bringing us.
Absolutely.
So within that line, and just to close, we at NOVA, now a little bit of institutional kind of, publicity, we at NOVA have been, devising programs to do just that. Facing, for example, in executive education, and Gada, you've been talking to us a little bit on those lines.
Yes.
On executive education, we tend to see the relationship with our students in a more recurrent kind of cumulative way. We design teaching modules that can be combined in order to award degrees, or that can be recycled, they can be renewed, they can come and take new versions of the same courses. All of that helps the life learning kind of process that Srinivas was saying that was so determinant.
It's the flexibility, us becoming more flexible as well.
And open to, listen to the society. A key feature of these projects that we are developing with the municipalities, it involves doing a skill gap approach to the workers, but of course, skill gap relative to what? I mean, I know what this, I can map the skills of the workforce, but in order to measure a gap, I need to know what the companies need, right? So part of the process is talking a lot with the companies, what they anticipate they will need, what is it that they need right now, what is it that, they can't find workers for, and take all that information and coordinate it with us, of course, in the areas that we have competences to teach, but also reaching out to other partner educational institutions to try to, incentivize them to offer the courses that, need to be offered, and in order to satisfy the needs of the market.
Thank you. Dr. Abla.
Yes.
No question, no new questions this time. Final thoughts.
Let me comment in general about the future of work and the challenge. I think our problem, and it's the problem in many other countries, but it's very clear in Egypt. We are talking about it all the time. We're describing the problem all the time, but we are not addressing the solutions to the problem. In order to address the solutions to the problem, I think we need to focus on what's called the drivers of change. There are many things that need fixing, but there are certain things that, when fixed, will make a very big difference in their impact. Okay, and I see these in 3 areas. Education, definitely. Okay, we're talking about the new skills and second one is the communication and the infrastructure for our communication and information technology. Okay, it needs strengthening, it needs a lot, okay, in order to do it right. Okay, and the third one is to provide incentives so that the business community can contribute and can support the education. I think each and every one of us has a role to play in this, in pushing for the implementation. AUC definitely has a big role. Your school in specific, Ghaida, has a big role. And I think you can present and provide a model where the gap between the supply and the demand of the market are narrowed and provide actually a model that can lead a paradigm shift in education, and at least in university education, maybe starting with the private universities and then proceeding after that to the more public. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abla. Nagla?
Thank you, Ghada. I think I'll echo Abla in that we cannot wait. I think the future of work is here and now. So, yes. So let us really make use of our youth, of our demographics, our women, our graduates who are unemployed as engines of growth domestically and through connecting to global platforms. Let us be agile and let us use digital and other simple technologies to do so. The problem is to do nothing, and we cannot do nothing. We really, there is an urgency in this. There's a dire need to act and act fast.
Thank you. Ayman, final thought.
Ghada, I wanted to build on some of the points in terms of the pace of change. About 25 years ago, when I was in the US, when Amazon was starting, and everybody was getting crazy that the whole retail sector is going to be destroyed and change and all of that. It didn't happen, but a decade or two later, it happened on steroids. There's something that I strongly believe on. Change, especially those types of disruptions, do not happen in a linear way. They happen in exponential. What does that mean? It means that over the short term, people overestimate what's going to happen. Over the long term, they underestimate what's going to happen. Next 5 years, probably there's going to be a lot less happening than what everybody thinks. 10, 15 years from now, it is going to be major change in every single thing what we do. We cannot afford to be late because those who start early are those who are going to be the winners. And there are three things. One is the infrastructure. Two is the policy and regulation. And three is on the education and the digital readiness. We have to be really focusing on those because those who will start early will end up being winners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ayman. And on this note, we've run out of time. I would have liked to have more time with this fantastic panel. I'd like to thank very much Dr. Srinivas Reddy, Dr. Pedro Brinca, Dr. Abla Abdellatif, Dr. Nagla Riz, and Dr. Ayman Ismail, and to all the participants in the roundtable today. This is not the last you will hear from us about the future of work. We will be doing more work in this area, so stay tuned. All very, very
Thanks to you, Ghada, for putting this.
Thank you, Ghada. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you.